This is the Begin Within podcast, where we believe real, lasting health and fitness requires you to start inside before you work out. I'm your host, Nate Slegger, and I'm here to show you behind the scenes of fitness. You already know exercise is good for you, but what about all the other things in life that affect your fitness? If you're looking for extra motivation to get started or to make sure you keep going, this is the place for you.
Produced by BeginWithin.fit.
Improving health is about so much more than just losing weight. But I realize weight loss might be the goal that brought you here to the Begin Within podcast. That's why I wrote my latest book, 5 Ways to Stop Wrecking Weight Loss, to reveal the 5 areas that I see are most overlooked by the people that I work with who want to lose weight. Each one of the chapters in this free ebook describes that specific area that you need to focus on to improve your health and get great permanent results. And it also links back here to episodes of the podcast where we've had experts on the show talking about that specific area, so you can benefit from those previous episodes while you're learning about how to maximize the results that you're after. You can get your free copy of my ebook, 5 Ways to Stop Wrecking Weight Loss, by going to beginwithin.fit/ebook or going to the link in the show notes. Now is a great time to do a little multitasking while you're listening to the start of this episode. Head over to grab your free copy of my book, 5 Ways to Stop Wrecking Weight Loss. If you missed the URL, here it is again, beginwithin.fit/ebook, or there is a link in the show notes for you. Grab your copy, and now let's get on with today's episode. My guest today is Brady Ross. He is an author, an ICF-certified professional coach, and the host of the Motivation for Regular People podcast. I'm happy to have him here today with us on the Begin Within Health Show to share his own personal fitness transformation story, and also some of the aspects that he feels as a professional coach will assist us each in our own health and fitness improvement journey. A few things that I'd love for you to listen for as you check out the interview that I had with Brady is, of course, his own story, but then some of the big lessons that he learned along the way. You're going to hear about a big shift that he started to have when he started to feel like he was experiencing more control over his circumstances. I think that's a really powerful theme that came out of the interview. I really want you to listen closely for that. He is going to talk about habits and what they do inside our brain. You know, I love to talk habits, and I love his approach. So when he mentions the word habits, pay very close attention. You will not be disappointed in what you take away. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about identity and how it influences our path toward improvement. So listen for those 3 kind of unique little themes in my interview. Please enjoy my conversation with Brady Ross.
I was starting college. I weighed almost 300 pounds. I didn't feel comfortable wearing certain types of clothing. I was partially concerned with how it made me look. I was also conscious with how it made me feel. Just wasn't really comfortable in my own skin. And I think that it even affected my confidence, my ability to put myself out there in relationships and in conversations. And it was funny because I had played sports in high school. I played baseball until I had a couple of knee injuries, which, to be honest with you, I think were also connected to being overweight. I wouldn't say I was obese at the time, but I was definitely always a little bit heavier. And so as I got out of sports, I didn't really keep up that same level of physical activity. But I still ate. Eating was a hobby for me. My second semester of high school, I took a job at an Italian restaurant, which meant that I got to make whatever under the sun I wanted to eat when it came break time. And so I got creative, and a lot of times I would have multiple like entrees at the same meal, which that also contributed to me nearly reaching 300 pounds. I may have reached that threshold at one point and I just don't remember, but that's where I was starting college. Didn't really have any sort of direction or desire to change. I just sort of felt trapped in that position where I was. And there was never really a come to Jesus type moment. It was more just my roommates and this guy that lived down the hall were going to the gym to lift weights. And I
Okay.
thought, well, if that's something that they're going to be doing, maybe I should do that too. And it was not a whole lot at first. It was a couple days a week. It was maybe a half hour each time. But as I started to do that more regularly, I started to notice some small changes. I dropped from 290 to like 265, and my clothes, started to fit a little looser. And the coolest thing was I started to see effects not just in my physical health, but in other areas of my life as well. I had an easier time studying, getting ready for class, preparing for tests. I was able to put myself out there in those relationships a little more. I had never dated seriously before that point in my life, but I had all of a sudden an easier time just approaching people of the opposite sex, starting conversations, taking people out on dates. And the coolest thing about all of it was I started to feel, and I think this is what connects that part of my life to where I am now, a greater sense of control and agency over my own destiny. Because beforehand, I would have told you success is predetermined. If someone makes better grades than me, it's because they're smarter. If someone's in better shape than me, it's because they have better genetics. But as I started to put these daily habits into practice, and as I started to change my own position, I realized that I had more control over my circumstances than what I thought before. And it's that belief and it's that understanding of the world that I think has led me to where I am today, which now, I weigh less than 200 pounds. I do multi sport races. I've lifted for on and off for the past, 11 to 12 years. And that's just how my physical health has transformed. In other areas of my life, I've been able to finish master's degrees. I've got the coaching certification. I've put out my book and my podcast. But I feel like all of these things in other areas of my life, I can trace it all back to the transformation that happened in my physical health.
Wow. That's awesome. Good for you, man.
Thanks. It's been
Um,
a journey full of ups and downs, but I'm certainly happy with where I am.
yeah, no, I love it. And you mentioned daily habits. I mean, that's something we talk about a lot here on this, this is a health show. So we're really focused on like the little steps that we can take. I'm curious if you don't mind kind of bouncing back there and then we'll kind of get up to the present again. What were some of the habits that for you made the biggest impact? I know you mentioned lifting weights, going to the gym. What other things did you notice that really helped to shift that sense of agency that you had over your
Mhm.
circumstances?
Yeah, so there's a couple sort of defining moments along the way that come to mind. One of them happened when I was a freshman in college, a few months after I started lifting on a regular basis for the first time. And I just didn't feel like going to the gym. I don't know if there was something else that was going on campus that I wanted to do instead, or if I just felt tired or like it wasn't, something that I wanted to do that day. And I don't exactly remember my thought process behind deciding to go in spite of that, but I did. And I just remember feeling incredible afterwards. Not even just physically. Obviously, there's a release of endorphins after you work out, but I felt good mentally. I felt more focused, more present with the people that I was with. And it was that feeling of accomplishment and seeing how making that decision to go work out impacted other areas of my life beyond just my physical feeling. It was something that I wanted to pursue. And I talked about this recently on another podcast, really what habits are and how habits come into place is when our brains recognize repeatable outcomes. So, in other words, our brains are hardwired to conserve energy because, as you can imagine, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of power to dictate, all of our actions. And so our brains are looking to conserve energy, and that's how habits come into play. You do something, it leads to a certain outcome, and your brain begins to associate that activity with that outcome. And so I think for me, maybe working out before had been something that I did. Maybe some days I enjoyed it, some days I didn't. But that day, the voice that was in my head was, you're not going to like this. You're going to feel tired. It's going to be uncomfortable. But I went and did it anyways. And then I had that a feeling of accomplishment and control afterwards. And so that was a major turning point for beginning to shift that habit and my understanding of working out from something that I don't enjoy and something that's uncomfortable to something that has a positive impact. And as that further developed over time, it just became something that I wanted to pursue and I wanted to chase even more. So that was one big one.
Nice.
The other big one actually happened after I put some of the weight back on. So the first time around, I just kind of giving you a 35,000 foot view. I weighed 285 in August 2011. I got down to 215 by July of 2013. So that's what, 70 pounds in about 2 years. And at that point, I thought that I had made it. I was like, I've got this story I'm going to get to tell. Like, I overcame, this is awesome. And not July, sorry, March 2014 is when my now wife and I started dating. And you know how it is when you're in a new relationship, like you're going out to eat, you're doing dessert, you're doing these different things, and maybe you get a little more comfortable. Like, I don't have to look a certain way to attract someone. And this was happening while I went to do an internship in a town where I was living, with this family for the summer, but they were traveling a lot. And I had a lot of freedom to just go and, eat out whenever I wanted. And so I used a lot of the money that I made that summer on different food. Didn't really cook at home a whole lot. And when I did, it was stuff that wasn't all that healthy. So, anyways, long story short, by December 2014, I had put 50 pounds back on. And it was really discouraging because I thought, all of those feelings that I had before about overcoming and accomplishment, I felt like it was all lost and I had myself to blame for it. So about 6 months later, I was down a little bit, but not significantly. I was probably around 255, 260. Because that's the funny thing is I'm still working out through this entire time, and I actually lifted more during that period than I have, since, with maybe one exception. But I was not eating well, and so I was not in a good physical condition. And I don't remember where I heard about MyFitnessPal, but I decided one day, kind of on a whim, I'm just going to give it a try. And so we went to lunch. We went to this local taco place here, which maybe this is the first time you'll ever hear like tacos talked about in the same context as fitness. But I thought I'm just gonna, log, and this is very important. I logged ahead of time before we went to the restaurant because I've learned that I make better decisions in advance than I do in the moment. It's a good commitment
Mhm.
device for me. So I logged like three tacos ahead of time. It was around 900 calories, which I probably wouldn't eat that much for lunch anymore. But back then, it represented a decrease. And the craziest thing happened. Like, I wasn't stuffed after the meal. I could have eaten more, but I felt satisfied. I was like, that's enough food for me to hold me over until the next meal. And so that was 2015. In the 8 years since then, I have logged on MyFitnessPal on and off. Some seasons I do it more than others. But let me tell you, this year, so we're recording mid-March. I've logged every single calorie that I've eaten this year. And there were a couple of things that sort of locked that in for me to move from something where I was doing it occasionally to something I was doing all the time. One thing was accountability. I've learned that that helps me lock in good habits pretty well because I don't want to tell someone that I'm going to do something and then not do it because I'll think, what if they ask about it? I'm going to have to tell them that I chose not to do something that I wanted to do, and I'll have to tell them why. But the other thing about it was realizing, and James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits, which I'm sure that book's come up on your podcast
Yeah.
multiple times. He talks about how the best way to change our actions or our habits is through identity change. And here's the thing, when we only do something, sometimes our brains get confused and it doesn't know like what kind of person we're trying to be. And so what I was doing is I would log my calories 5, maybe 6 days a week, and then I would give myself a cheat day, but it was never just one cheat day. There would always be like the ideal was one, but it might be two, it might be 3 days where I'm not logging calories. And I was never able to lock in this habit in a consistent manner because it was so sporadic. And so I think the accountability and then better recognizing like what was happening internally and mentally helped me lock this in to the point where, yeah, there are days where I go over. I think there's been 2 days this month where I've been over 1,000 calories on my daily goal, but I'm still logging consistently. And I think that, although that awareness can be kind of um, surprising, realizing, oh, I've had this much to eat today, I think that it is in a weird way like a motivator for me to keep that number down and then quickly correct if I have a day where it's higher than normal.
Nice. Wow, I like that. That's great. I like the idea of and that you mentioned there the importance of our identity and being very intentional about the decisions we make. I think it's James Clear he talks too about um casting a vote, like our actions throughout the
Hmm.
day, like cast a vote for an identity. Am I
Hmm.
this or am I that? Am I this or am I that? And that's really interesting that you had that awareness of the fact that there were votes being cast both ways, and then once you got it all aligned for the person that you want to be, that's when the kind of the permanent change settled in. Hmm.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
That is
Yeah.
awesome.
I had
Cool.
another conversation recently with someone, just to throw one more thing in
Yeah.
there. And this is a friend that started running recently. And they said to me, at what point do I become a runner? And I kind of thought for a second, and inspired by James Clear, I said, you become a runner at the point when you start to believe that you're a runner. We like to create these artificial thresholds in our brain where, you have to run 3 days a week or you have to run a mile without stopping before you can consider yourself a runner. And it's not true. You are a runner at the point when you identify yourself as a runner. And the cool thing about that is, one, that brings the goal, from being something far off in the future to being something you can experience today. And it's when you adopt that sort of identity, not just trying to perform a certain action, but embodying a certain concept or value that's going to reinforce that action in a way that helps you reach those performance goals or milestones that you're trying to move towards.
Yeah. Oh man, that's great. I love it. Can we switch gears a little bit? Talk about
Yeah.
coaching. I know you mentioned that, and I know that's a big part of what you do and who you are. Um, could you tell us a little, just I guess maybe some basic coaching concepts that you found would help, and I guess would help in the fitness and health improvement realm? Because I feel like we um have an idea of like a coach. We think of like the sport coach, like the football coach, like telling us what to do, yelling at us, um, or like the Biggest Loser trainers. Like those are the
Hmm.
coaches that are going to help me to get fit. But I think our perspective here on this podcast is very much more compassionate, very much more um, intuitive and respectful of I guess what's going on inside, right beneath the
Hmm.
surface. And I know as a coach, you're very much in tune with those things and trying to get results for the clients that you're working with. Um, so what are some of the concepts, maybe one or two of the bigger concepts that you deal with as a professional coach that would help us out in the fitness realm?
Hmm. Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, we kind of talked about this off air, but the word coaching is so ambiguous in our world today. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The kind of coaching that I practice as an ICF certified coach, and I know that you're familiar with this from some of the work that you've done, it's not about prescribing solutions, but it's about leading the client in a conversation or an exercise that helps them discover things they didn't know that they knew. In the coaching program that I went through, we talked about two different types of questions. There's test questions, which are things like, what is the capital of Wisconsin? That's something you either know or you don't. You might have to think about it, but there's a clear right answer and a clear wrong answer. And then there's another type of questions, which are discovery questions. And these are questions that force you to think and create, maybe it's something new, maybe it's something you haven't thought about in a while. And as you do that, your brain is building new patterns, new connections, new ways of seeing old problems and old issues. So an example would be something like, who are three people who have impacted your life in a major way? And so you know that, but you might have to think on it, you might have to reflect. And that's really what coaching does. Is it is a process that you go through that helps you think new thoughts and then put those new thoughts into action through application and accountability and things like that. So in terms of the connection between coaching and fitness, I think it's important to recognize that when we think about fitness, we often look at things that are a means to an end and we consider them to be the end themselves. I know that there's people out there who think, I need to get in shape, and in order to get in shape, I need to go running. And there's a lot of people who just don't enjoy running, and it's never going to be something that they feel high levels of motivation to do. They might enjoy another form of physical activity like playing a sport or going for a walk with a friend or doing a class where there's a community aspect involved, but they don't consider those things because they have a limited view of fitness, that it's, putting on running shoes and going for a jog after work. And so I think one of the cool things that coaching can do is it can expand people's brains to consider new options, new opportunities, and then even going back a step to imagine, like, what does the ideal look like? So if I was to coach someone around getting in shape, that might be one of the first questions that I ask. Imagine that 6 months from now, you're in the best shape of your life. What does that look like? How does that impact the other areas of your life? And then once you have that ideal picture in your mind, you can work backwards to figure out what steps it's going to require to get you to that point, what challenges are going to stand in your way. And then the deepest level of coaching, which is probably one of my favorites, we refer to it as coaching the person and not the problem. But it's even looking past, a particular issue like, I want to get in shape or I want to eat better, and considering what needs to change or develop inside of you that will equip you or enable you to approach your problem differently. And if you're able to do that well, then you're able to impact not just how you approach fitness related topics, but how you approach life as a whole.
Nice. I like that. As you were talking about the test questions versus discovery, I think, I guess the thoughts that I had were, that so often we do approach fitness as a test, as I gotta find the right answer to get the result I want. I gotta find it. And when we open our minds up to the fact that it's more about discovery, it's more about who you are now, who you want to be, and the fact that there's so many paths to get you there that you probably don't even realize. We just have to discover. We have to discover the right one. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
that really
talked to the
resonated with me. I'm glad you selected that. Though I know I kind of like was like, Brady, what do you got for principles that apply from coaching into fitness? And that was a really interesting one that you picked. I like that. That's gonna stay with me. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, I talked to the coach one time that used the example of chips and queso as a metaphor. He said that, people, what they really want is the queso. The chip is only effective because it helps you get to the queso. If you really want queso, you can use a spoon, you can use your finger. If you're ever eating queso with me, please don't do that. But if you want queso bad enough, you can use your finger. Um, but I think what happens is, to break down this metaphor a little bit, people look at things like running or even lifting weights and they think that's the queso. Really,
Mm,
that's the chip. The queso is being in shape, it's how you feel about yourself, it is, enhanced quality of life. And so I think that that's another area where coaching comes into play, because it helps people consider, what do I really want, what truly motivates me? And then once you have that understanding locked in, then you can figure out how to get there in a way that will work for you.
nice. Awesome. Thank you for sharing your story with us and for opening our minds up a little bit about coaching. What's the best way for people to connect with you, to follow you, to get in touch with your work?
Yeah, so you can go to my website at bradyross.com, just my first and last name. Once you get there, you'll learn about my book. I wrote a book recently where I really unpacked not just my story, but the 7 things that I do on a daily basis. And I say 7 things on a daily basis. That probably sounds overwhelming to some people. I may not do all 7 of these things every single day, but I would say I do them more often than not. And it's what helped me get from that place that I talked about earlier, where I was, overweight, not feeling confident, to the place where I am now. So all of that information's on my website. You can also subscribe to my podcast. You can subscribe to my weekly midweek momentum newsletter. You'll get a free preview of the book once you subscribe to that. And I'm trying to move away from social media just for my own mental health and well-being, but there's a link on my website. If you want to connect and talk more about fitness or motivation, you can send me an email and then I'll reach out directly to you.
Okay, awesome, cool. Thank you so much for being here on the Begin Within Health Show.
Thanks for having me, Nate. This was fun.
The link to get over to bradyross.com is waiting for you in the show notes. If you'd like to check in with him, check out his book or his podcast there. I want to just focus on something that we kind of ended up talking about in the interview, and that was this idea of identity, right? What he said that was so powerful, I love, is that when we only do something sometimes, it's confusing. And it can be, even if we only do something, still most of the time, it can still be confusing for us. And I think the way that we would properly put it in perspective is to just say this: am I doing it enough to get the results that I want? Am I happy with the results? Am I happy with the direction that I'm going? We have to stop and we have to reflect back. We have to intentionally create some space for awareness about how things are going. And then be really honest. Am I casting the vote consistently enough for the identity that I have indeed chosen? And, everything that we do, everything you and I do, is a vote. Every choice we make is a vote for an identity, a version of ourselves that we're becoming, that we're on the way to being in the future. And if we've cast enough votes for the person that we want to be, well, that is the person that we're going to be. But if we're not, if we're voting for someone else, it's going to show up in the results that we have. And so really realizing that, being honest about it, the way that he was in his own journey, taking a look at it can be very, very helpful. I think that's such a really just a cool perspective to have, a really beneficial way to look at this whole journey for us. And of course, I think it's a little bit more granular, maybe just a little bit more zoomed in, but the statement that he made, that he found that he made better decisions in advance than he did in the moment. Isn't that interesting? When it comes to casting a vote for the identity of the person that we really want to be, so often we make better decisions in advance than we do in the moment. In the moment, there are so many other pressures swirling around us that might move us to do something different, to cast a vote for the person that we don't want to be. But if we can do as much as possible to make that decision easier by the work we do in advance, then we're much more likely to follow through, taking the action, seeing it through, and becoming the person that we want to be. I know that you're here because you want some very specific results. Maybe it's weight loss, maybe it's something else in the fitness realm, but you're here because you want to improve your health ultimately. And I think it's good for us every once in a while to really focus on the fact that that requires that we shift our identity. We change who we are. If we try to be the same person and just get different results in our life, it's not very likely to happen. It might, maybe, we could even argue that it would be impossible. If I try to be the same person but get a different result, it would be impossible. I have to change myself so much that I'm taking on a different identity in order to get the things that I want. And that is certainly true in terms of health and fitness. So I want to thank Brady Ross so much for being on the show, for shining some light on these important topics with us here on the Begin Within Health show. And I want to thank you for being here with me. I want to thank you so much for rating and reviewing the podcast in your podcast player. I want to thank you as well for taking a screenshot of yourself listening to this episode, posting it, and tagging me, so that I can give you a high five. And again, I just want to thank you for your time and for your attention with me here on the Begin Within Health show. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk with you again very soon.